welterweights throwing down here as we have Kevin Holland coming in at plus 110, going up against Randy Rude Boy Brown coming in at minus 130. Now, Holland rides a 2-fight losing streak, and going into studying this matchup, I was kind of surprised that he had Mike Malott on his record. I completely forgot that fight even happened, when I researched the fight, I remember why. It wasn't that great of a fight. Both guys kind of trying to assert their dominance early, and then Malott lands a nasty knee to the groin of Holland near the ending of that first round, and it really seemed like Holland was reeling the rest of the fight. He was constantly backing up, letting Malott dictate the pace and control that fight, and Malott was able to go out there and outstrike Kevin Holland. Holland still landed decent output, but he seemed unsure of himself. I think the cage control of Malott, the constant forward pressure, the output that he was throwing as well was enough to outdo whatever Holland was doing in return. But again, I really think Holland just kind of gave up on the fight after having his groin knee the way that he did in the first round. So I'm willing to give him a little bit of a pass there. But his loss against Daniel Rodriguez was a big red flag. I am constantly a guy that looks for reasons to fade Kevin Holland, but I really felt like that Daniel Rodriguez fight was a perfect stylistic matchup for him to go out there and do what he does best. But he got rocked in the first round. He got rocked again later on in that fight, and he just couldn't get his legs back about him, and he ended up losing that fight on the scorecards as a minus 300 favorite. It was not a good look. It was a far cry from what we saw him do against Vicente Luque and even the success he had against Gunnar Nelson. But he is starting to, really show his ceiling at this point in time and showcase that he's probably not going to be able to make it much further. He's 33. He's taken his time a little bit more as well. He's coming off a 6-month break now, which is definitely needed considering he had 5 fights from January to October of last year, stayed very active in 2025. Maybe he's going to take his time a little bit more in 2026. But at his best, slick striker from distance, sneaky front choke series as well, BJJ black belt, but we often see him lean on his striking more than anything, and that's where better strikers have often gotten the better of him, especially when his ego comes into play and he wants to try to outstrike better strikers. That's possibly what he's facing this weekend as he goes up against Randy Brown, who's looking to bounce back from his main event loss against Gabriel Bonfim from back in November. That was his first ever fight as a main event in the UFC, and he's been with the promotion, I believe, for close to 10 years now. He's 4-1 over his previous 5 fights going into that fight against Bonfim. The one loss in that run was against Brian Battle. Very close fight, a fight he probably deserved to win at the end of the day, but the UFC still rewarded him. They gave him the fight against Nicholas Dalby. He came through with a nasty knockout, and then he got put in that main event slot against the rising contender in Gabriel Bonfim. But let's talk about the Dalby fight real quick. There was a lot of bad blood going into that fight. Both guys chirping at each other the entire time, forcing each other to engage in the pocket more than we've seen them in the past. And I think that's what caused Randy Brown to get knocked down in the first round of that fight. But luckily, he survived, got back into it, and ended up knocking out Nicholas Dalby himself. I believe that fight was in the second, or that finish was in the second round. But still, he's a solid fighter. He's 8-3 since 2021. His only losses coming to Jack Della Maddalena, who ended up going on to win a title after that. His controversial split decision loss to Brian Battle, and then that main event knockout loss to Gabriel Bonfim. I will say this about the Bonfim fight. That was a fight where and I'm sure a lot of people expected Bonfim to get to his grappling to have any success of winning that fight. But he went out there and he largely outstruck Randy Brown in the first round, landing better shots. And then in the second round, was seeming like it was starting to level out a little bit more. And then Bonfim landed that sneaky knee in the clinch, and that dropped Brown right away. There is a argument that it was a quick stoppage. I think Brown got back to his feet right away. In a main event slot, you want to give these guys a little bit more rope, but I'm sure Bonfim probably would have got the finish, maybe jumped on a submission, if anything, to try to secure the victory that way. But yeah, I feel for Brown a little bit. When you rewatch the replay, you kind of see Brown's eyes rolling to the back of his head. His head kind of bounces off the mat as he hits the ground. So I can see the fighter safety argument there, but it's a main event. It's a big time spot for Randy Brown, who's been in the UFC for a long time, 35 years old. You want to give him a little bit of rope. At his best, nasty striker from distance, 6'3", 78-inch reach. That is huge for the welterweight division, and that's why often we see him have so much success sticking at distance, utilizing that long jab, that straight down the pipe. It's very hard for a lot of fighters to have success against him there. And even with his defensive grappling, he does a great job in terms of working right back to his feet and then getting back out into distance where he's often the most comfortable. Now here against Kevin Holland, Holland normally utilizes his range and reach to keep opponents at bay, but that's going to be very hard to do here, even against Randy Brown. They are the same height. I believe Holland holds a 3-inch reach advantage, but I don't think it's going to be that exaggerated. So for him to go out there and try to fight in my opinion, better technical striker than Brown, I think it's going to be hard for Holland to just maintain his success. I think we'll see Brown touch Holland up. I think we'll see him maybe even drop him a few times. I think we'll see Holland eventually look to get to the grappling, but I don't think his wrestling is good enough to get Brown there and keep him there. And I think that's going to eventually cause Brown to keep this fight in the striking realm, start picking Holland apart, and I'll also say this. I wouldn't be surprised if Brown even ends up wrestling a bit here, right? We've seen Holland struggle off his back at times, but if Brown is smart, he's going to keep the standing. He's going to use his 1-2. He's going to use his teep. He's going to keep Holland at bay, and he's going to utilize that speed to really pick Holland apart. So I'm going to go Brown here. I'm going to go Brown by decision, and I think this -130 line is a damn good line to shoot on as well.